Shalom, WJC family. It's time for our weekly Torah talk. This week in synagogue, we will be reading Parshat Shoftim, pretty much at the center now of the book of Devarim, of Moshe's grand speech. He's moving on now from this, all the introduction, the history, and what we owe to God, and how we should behave sort of in general, to specifics. And one of the things that Moshe addresses in Parshat Shoftim is governance. And God says, if you want a king when you get into the land, that's fine, you can have a king. But he has all these instructions about what the king is allowed to have and how they are supposed to behave. One of the things it says in chapter 17, verse 18, a very interesting verse, I think, it says, V'haya kishivto al kisei mamlachto, and when he is sitting on his throne, v'katav lo et mishnei haTorah hazot, he should write for himself, or it should be written for him, a Mishnah HaTorah, this Mishnah HaTorah, not translating that on purpose, we're going to come back to it, Al Sefer, on a book, as a book, Milifnei HaKohanim Levim, the one that the Kohanim and Levim have. So the king is supposed to have a Sefer Torah. They're supposed to have it with them when they sit on the throne. And, they're supposed to study it and read it and be familiar with it, which makes sense if they're going to be the adjudicators of law, the executive branch, so to speak, of law in this newly settled land of Israel. They need to know the law. However, that phrase, Mishnah HaTorah Hazot, it's a little ambiguous. And so, for example, Onkelos, the Aramaic translator, very early translator of the Torah, considered to give important commentary, he translates Mishneh as Patshegen, which is a great word, one that comes up a lot in Megillat Esther. A Patshegen is a document, is a letter, a declaration. So he says Patshegen Oraita Hada, right? A document of the Torah, written Torah. Okay, so basically he says on the throne he should have a written Torah. That makes perfect sense. However, Rashi translates it differently. Rashi says that there's in fact two Torahs, that Mishneh here doesn't mean like Mishnah Torah, the teaching of the Torah, but Mishneh is in Shnei, Shnayim, two, from the word for, in Jewish for two, in Hebrew for two. So what does it mean you should have two Sifrei Torah? So Rashi explains he should have one for when he's sitting on his throne, and another, one place in his treasury, and the other that goes with him everywhere he goes. So one sits basically in his house, and the other he carries with him everywhere he goes. So the question this raises is, why would the king need two Sifrei Torah? Why couldn't the same Sefer Torah that he carries with him everywhere be the one that he reads when he's home? It doesn't make sense necessarily that he should have two Sifrei Torah. So along comes a rabbi named Elchanan Sorotzkin, and he gives a very beautiful, I think, midrash on this, explanation of this, that is particularly useful for us in this month of Elul, as we prepare for the high holidays. He says that the Torah that you take with you all the time, the Torah that you carry into your life and into your world and into your business dealings and so on and so forth, that's an important Torah. But you become very familiar with that Torah. You stop questioning and asking if you're following the right path with that Torah. When you come home and you can take a breath, it's important to measure that Torah against a pure Torah, against a theoretical Torah. The Torah that's at home is your solid foundational guide, against which you measure the Torah that you carry out every day. That's a tall order. It is very hard to be reflective right? We go out, we do the things we think are good, of course we do. And then we're supposed to come home and we're supposed to reflect on that and measure what we thought was good against some greater good. But the answer is yes, that when we get too familiar and we get habituated, it's easy to lose track of that sort of solid line, and the line gets blurry. In particular, this month of Elul, which we started last Shabbat, is the time to take out that at-home Torah, the Torah from our treasury, to go back and look at those core values, the fundamental ideals that we learn from our Jewish faith. And then take out the Torah, the dealings that we've done every day, and to compare them to one another, to measure them one against the other, and to make sure that as we've moved through the year, we've been able to carry that Torah forward with us into our everyday dealings. That's what Elul is all about. Ultimately, that's what these approaching high holidays are all about. An opportunity to reflect, not that we went out to do bad, or that we said, great, I'll leave my Torah at home and I'll just do whatever I want, and the next high holidays I'll check. No, but in fact, the hardest part is when we think we've been out there doing good or trying to do good, and then we need to stop and reflect and make sure that they weren't just good intentions, but that they were in fact following the pure sense of Torah, of God's purpose for us in the world, of bringing holiness into the world, of bringing tikkun, repair to the world. Ultimately, that is all of our tasks, and now is the time to really get reflective, to look at the Torah that's in our treasury, the Torah that's at our core, that's in our neshama, deep inside us, that we learn from our teachers and our rabbis and from our sacred texts, and make sure that is still the Torah that we're carrying into our everyday. Hopefully, we will find that it's the same, and when we find those discrepancies, we'll work hard to fix them. That is how we will ensure a Shana Tova in the year to come. May we all have one, as well as a Shabbat Shalom.